chembe yakho. Ivaliwe. Funa ube nayo. Ube nayo ngingasho. Oh, okay. I think look, if you can just have a minute. Well, my name is Uspamandla Mhlongo. I'll be moderating today's session where the Herald as well as CANRAD, the Center for Advancement of Non-Racialism and Democracy, are co-hosting an engagement to try and debrief or engage with the context under which our 30-year celebration of both of our democracy, but also 2026 is coming up and we'll be celebrating 30 years of the South African Constitution. I won't go into depth in terms of the topic right now, but I will invite Prof. Mngomezulu, who is the Executive Director of the CANRAD, to do an official welcome along with us. We do apologize for the slight delay for those of you who are joining us online. We will make sure to stick to the time going forward. Thank you very much. Prof, welcome.
Thank you very much, Program Director and colleagues. Thank you for coming. We, as Njomane just said, we are running a bit late, but we have to start because we are having colleagues joining us online. And we are still also waiting for the other guests, but rather than waiting for them doing nothing, we thought we should start with the program because otherwise we'll be delayed. Program Director, Mr. Mhlongo, Nelson Mandela community, especially my diligent CANRAD staff, led by Ms. Scott, we call her CISB. Our colleagues from the Herald newspaper and other media houses present here, representatives from various political parties, and Sangoko's EXCO, which is one of the NGOs we work with, our keynote speaker, Dr. Masogo, and our respondent, Dr. Karomo, members of the public and all those who have joined us through our virtual platforms. Ladies and gentlemen, as CANRAD and the university at large, together with the Herald newspaper, we are delighted and deeply honored by your presence at this very important dialogue on the constitution of this country. You will agree with me when I say that this discussion is long overdue. After 30 years of democracy, it is incumbent upon all of us to look back and reflect on the tumultuous journey we have traveled thus far. The reflection includes asking ourselves some very pertinent questions on whether the constitution that we have does in fact serve the purpose for which it was meant. It is within this context that we coined today's theme as follows: what is wrong with our constitution, reflections, and prospects? This question has been reverberating in the minds of many South Africans for various reasons. The high crime rate, excessive rights enjoyed by both suspects and criminals, a weak and compromised justice system, which eats from the palm of politicians, and of course a Western conception of the judiciary are among the questions that we are battling with, which then necessitated this dialogue. Importantly, the discussion has been given more impetus by the developments which took place before the May 2024 general election and subsequent debates that took place in Parliament when it officially opened. Issues such as the various interpretations of Section 47(1)(e) by the Electoral Court and by the Constitutional Court necessitated that we do have a relook at our Constitution to establish if indeed it still serves the purpose for which it was meant. Working in collaboration with the Herald newspaper, we cogently crafted a few questions which we hope our speakers will help unpack. The first question is our Constitution still relevant today in its current format? Number two, to what extent does the Constitution serve the interests of South Africans? Question three, what is missing in our Constitution? And the last but one question, does the Constitution accommodate African values? Then the last one, which is a very important one, what should we do in order to make our Constitution more relevant and appropriate to the South African context? We are delighted that Dr. Masugu and Dr. Karomo agreed to use their legal expertise and their lived experiences in order to assist us navigate through these questions and ventilate on them as we prepare for the next 30 years in this country. We look forward to an exciting dialogue, and may you all enjoy it as much as I anticipate I will. Ngiyabonga, thank you, enkosi.
Thank you very much, Prof, for that grounding of our discussion today. I think it's important that we underscore the importance of this discussion, especially given the moment that we're in. We hosted a very exciting but quite challenging elections this year in 2024. And when I got the invitation to come and moderate, I was like, thank God it's not another political party debate. It's going to be a bit more calm. We're going to be able to hear each other a bit more. But ultimately, it's quite brave to also be asking the question of what is wrong with our South African constitution. A number of political parties during the election itself were discussing and discoursing about the implication of this constitution that we have on generally the nature of representation, but ultimately the transformative nature that we want to see in our country, both in terms of the economy, but also just in terms of representation, the ways in which we're able to hold leaders accountable, the ways in which the judiciary itself is able to conduct its work. Interestingly, on the journey here to this specific venue, we were also talking about things like judicial overreach, the things like what they call the counter-majoritarian dilemma. Politicians always say judges are not elected. So therefore, how is it that they have so much power to overturn things that we ourselves, as politicians, determine on? The voters put us into power in order to be able to make certain things happen. And if you don't allow us that power to do so, you're undermining the voter innately. Of course, I don't have a lot of the answers to these questions, so we hope our two speakers, in their respective prowess, ideological, intellectual prowess, they'll be able to lead us through a very capable discussion. But what I want to also center is that your voices are also quite important in this discussion, both online and in person. We hope that you'll be able to be willing to enter into a discussion with us that is both exciting and vigorous in nature, and that you will be open to being challenged in terms of your thinking as well about our constitution. A lot of us who are so-called born frees were told to be excited and to celebrate this constitution. But since the passing of the statesman, former President Nelson Mandela, there have been a lot of questions about the compromises that led us to where we are as a country. And so it's important that we discuss this openly and ensure that ultimately whatever discussions we end up with, they are reflected also in the political power, the power politic of this country. I'll now introduce you briefly to our keynote speaker, Dr. Ngengelezi Masuku. He's got a very long bio, but ultimately he is Wiseman Ketogwake Masuku, famously known as Ngengelezi. And he hails from the hills of Oyai and the north coast of KwaZulu-Natal in Eshowe, under Inkosi Ntuli at Phezukwentaba village. His humble academic career began. I only chuckle because, you know, when people who are already doctors, who are professors, and they say there's a humble academic career, you've reached the ultimate pinnacle of academia, and yet you call yourself humble. You should rave and rant about those things. Us who are still in undergrad and honors, who only wish to be at that place at some point. So his humble academic career began at Vulingondo Primary School, from where he proceeded to Mavumengwane High School, where he studied under the ethical and moral principal Unjumane. As you would also know, he was affectionately known as Tiger. He studied through the financial aid since his mother was a domestic worker. She supplemented her meager wages by selling umqomboti and used the money to raise her 8 kids. Sisbongiwe from Bongolwane Catholic Mission facilitated his financial academic support at UKZN with sister mother Gregoria Igamalama Kos Malbongwe and Herald Gegner from Germany. You and I, Doc, we share history because our institution, my institution, is funded by Germany as well. So my finance manager always says it's taxpayers' money, so we must always make sure we use it wisely. Dr. Masuku holds a BE admin from the University of Durban-Westville, now known as UKZN, an honours degree and a master's degree in public policy and management from UWC, the University of Western Cape. His thesis was based on the planning and design of a future electronic voting system for South Africa. He also holds a postgraduate diploma in monitoring and evaluation from Stellenbosch University, a certificate in leadership on African renewal, and another certificate in political economy from the Thabo Mbeki African School of Public and International Affairs. So his PhD was based at the integration of traditional leadership into modern governance in rural municipalities through the participatory monitoring and evaluation model, and it's from the University of Fort Hare. I'm thinking I might need to change one of my speakers for a conference that I'm holding later this month as well. Of course, we are going to be engaging with him for the next 30 minutes. Our respondent, I'll introduce a bit later, but Dr. Masuku will be speaking for about 30 minutes, giving us his introductory remarks. Thereafter, we'll have a respondent that will speak for 15 minutes, and then we'll have an opportunity to engage in a Q&A. If you come up and think of any questions at this point, I'd advise that you write them down or note them on your cell phones if possible, so that we can be able to engage in a thorough discussion. I'd like to welcome you, Dr. Masuku. A round of applause, please.
Thank you, Program Director. In the interest of time, suffice to say all protocol observed with my humble respect. I must say that I'm very honored in this university, which is so prestigious under the banner of our global icon, Ubaba Inkosi, former President Nelson Mandela. I must say, Program Director, that I believe that those who were before me have spoken in length in regards to the positive side of the Constitution. Never mind that you have decided to put me on the spotlight with this topic. I must say again that the topic is so complicated precisely because we talk about things that we don't know, that we know, but we sugarcoat them in reality. That when we speak about them, we are anti-revolution, we are anti the Constitution, and so forth. We must nest issues. And apart from being an academic, I'll also bring the flair of being in Ikoboga, is that right in Xhosa? Or umuntu obomvu, okanye umuntu ongafundanga esikoleni, because at times we as academic, we sugarcoat the truth. But the citizens, they speak the truth. Program Director, right as you're saying, that the question about our Constitution is still relevant or still fit for purpose, given the fact that it is a negotiated settlement. Just emphasize that. And after 30 years of democracy, our society is evolving in terms of reality, in relation to the Constitution that is so transformative. And of course, these days, we're talking about technology. And the question is, where do we put the issue of technology in terms of access to internet as a human right? But bear in mind that we need to look at or analyze the character of our Constitution, which is so Eurocentric, commercialized, and apologetic to some extent. And of course, we need to look at the historical part, the political part, and the legal questions and implications thereof. I won't bore you that much with the history, because I believe that Advocate Mugaitobi has done a lot in this work. But suffice to say, history books and legal books reveal that our South African jurisprudence is traced from Roman Dutch law, translated into Cape Colony, and it was imposed and implemented to the indigenous people, that's Khoisan. Needless to mention that it was imposed despite of their kings and queens. Hence, I decided to put that photo, Hence, I decided to put that photo for deliberate reason of our former president wearing that treasury regala as Inkosi. Now, I'm saying, Program Director, it's not a mistake that we are regarded as the best constitution from international praises backed by international history. You see, when you look at our constitution in terms of character, it's like we are giving a clean audit to a department. But when you check that clean audit against the reality, it's totally different. Same applies to this constitution that is being praised internationally. The question is, at whose expense as South Africans? Because it's totally different from what we're being told. But you understand when you look at the nature of where we're coming from, that those who are coming from the date, who are romantic and so forth, juxtaposing in this context that there are things that you don't say when you're going for a date. Even if you don't agree with it, but you try to impress your partner. Same applies where we're coming from. When we're drafting the constitution, there were things that we did not say. There are things that we did not touch because we're scared of violence, and we are not violent, especially when it comes to issues of economy. And I'm saying, Program Director, that it is not surprising that those who benefited from land grab were protected while others took opportunity through this deliberate gap. Hence, we have got two economies: the richer get richer and the poor get poor. And for me, I've got a problem with this. I'm going to respond later about this in the interest of time. When it comes to the issue of law of the land in Chapter 8 of the Constitution, in my assessment, I'm saying, like any other states or kingdoms, South Africa is a diverse country, and zooming to Africans and Nguni nations, kuthiwa imithetho izigodi okanye imithetho yengingqi. Same applies to federal states. They've got their own federal laws and they are being respected and recognized. But question at heart, what was the law of the land among these tribes or nations? Answer was the Bantu law, which should have been integrated in the South African judiciary. And I'm saying South Africa is living in an accepted contractual legal system. It's just to back up my point. Imagine you ask your grandmother, your grandfather, what is customary law? Of course, she will give an initial response to say, because that's not our source of law. Our source of law is what? Is the Bantu law that they know. And I'm saying Section 66, when you go to the Constitution, disregard tribal court in the judicial system as the African court. They talk about magistrate, Supreme Court of Appeal, High Court, your Crown Court, but this one is disregarded in the Constitution. Despite of its strategic lessons from dispute resolution, including both criminal and civil procedure in the context of restorative justice. Let me pause a little bit. You see, when you go to the tribal court, I stole a goat of Professor Mngomezulu, and I'm criminally charged. But at the same time, I'm forced to buy back or bring back that goat. That's civil law that you hardly find in the current judicial system. And on top of that, we reconcile. Immediately, I take so-and-so to court, we're enemies forever. But in this judicial system that is within our tribal context, there is reconciliation, there is peace. And in the context of justice, we have met that because that's what our court is supposed to preach. Unfortunately, it doesn't. Section 181, Chapter 9, Institution Program Director, disregard family institutions. It talks about all these institutions that you know. I don't have a problem with that. But the family institutions, they play a role in the context of family unity, social cohesion, and settlement out of court. Let me pause a little bit there. You see, there are cases that when we are sitting down to say they were not supposed to go to court. They should have been dealt by the family institutions. Imagine you take me, for example, to court, maybe for a divorce. I'm just making an example. 2 days later, you realize that, no, we made a mistake, let's reconcile. But in the process, you have wasted state resources. And then if there was these family institutions, they would have played a role in saving the resources of government. So what I'm saying is that family institutions must be emphasized in the Constitution if we are serious about this democracy. I'm saying, Program Director, the Constitution is convenient in the context of value for Ubuntu. That the drafters of the Constitution deliberately ignored the value of Ubuntu for convenient reasons, meaning that they know about its significance and implication in the context of desired justice. I'm making my point on 3 grounds. That one, Ubuntu value is a convenient or romantic concept in the Bachopil principle, people first, abantu kuqala. When you go to the Department of Public Service and Administration, for I've worked there, the building is painted as the Bachopil building. Number 3, when you go to the case law, State versus Makwenyane, the principle or the value of Ubuntu was invoked to say we cannot kill a person because it's against our culture or our value of Ubuntu as Africans. But this is a question that I want to challenge you on. If our drafters of the Constitution see the significance of the value of Ubuntu, why it was removed, not even a sentence in the Constitution, as the founding value? The answer is this. It then tells that Africans were ripped off with their rule of law or law of the land as their identity. Because Ubuntu will resonate with us in our DNA, and it should be the founding principle of the Bill of Rights. And I'm saying that they should have been rolled over to Section 39 as a relevant source of law, as I've discussed, as I've explained that this thing of customary law, it's a foreign language. It's not a source of law as Africans. First things first, in the Bachopil context, at the center of applicable laws and remedies, what do I mean about these laws? I'm going to talk about law of evidence, law of property, and law of damages. Needless to mention criminal law in my slide. Chapter 1 should have been written as Abantu Kuqala, people's first. I understand how it's written there, but for me, this should have been, it should have been written in this way. Why I'm saying that? Because the first citizens that we are referring to is Amakosi and Khoisan citizens. Precisely because they were the first victims of the colonial or apartheid laws. This means that even Chapter 12 is mistakenly positioned from legal chronological order, meaning that it should also form part of Chapter 1, similar to Section 25, which is a hot potato, the issue of property. Because what happened, and those who came, they first stole livestock from indigenous people, and the Constitution is silent about that. Followed by evil and cold stealing of land. And this section should have been rewritten as returning stolen land through Amakosi, working with government or other stakeholders. And I'm questioning the issue of compensation laws in the context of land. For me, that is distorted. What should have happened, remember, when these people came, Babelimil, there was harvest, maize, mealies, and so forth. For me, that compensation is supposed to talk in that context, not to the issue of land. Having said that, you could see that where I'm going, I'm going to the preamble, echoed by e-Bible, that it should have been based on moral and ethical grounds, that thou should not steal, including ethical leadership in terms of, in the context of arms of state against misconduct. Namhlanje, there are cases that go to court, and you ask yourself, if those cases that go to court, which clause are they referring to when it comes to ethics and so forth? Something that is lacking in the Constitution. When it comes to Section 26, right to housing in the form of an RB house, for me, it is highly distorted. Rather than that section should have been written as rebuilding distracted homestead, reference go to Ichalala Mawele or Shaka. What do I mean by that? These people had homelands. As Africans, we don't build one house. We don't do that. But the Constitution instead is just sugarcoated the matter with the RB house. I don't have a problem with the RB house, but for me, that first part should have been highly prioritized. I don't want to bore much with this thing, but I'm arguing on the movable and immovable property. And I'm saying these are unfair clause, precisely because you buy a house for 1.2 million. You buy a car for 1.2 million, but you pay a bond for 25 years, a car 6 years. Are you going to sleep in the car? That's my question. Yes, they are saying, but it's low, but for me, it's totally unfair. And the Constitution must deal with this kind of issues. In the assessment of birth names and languages, I'm saying this chapter should have been part of chapter 1 because black people were given new European names without meaning in it using faith and religion. We end up having 2 names, but the Constitution is silent about that. I know the argument will be, but it's Home Affairs. But you know this process in Home Affairs does not assist. For me, I'm saying there should be a special clause to deal with this kind of names that does not resonate with us. Imagine, my brother, we are called Ngengelezi, you don't even know it. You are going to school, but when you're at school, you are given a new name that you don't know it. And for me, it really undermines the black people, and there's nothing that has been done in the context of the Constitution. Now, the other thing that I'm not happy about in the Constitution, when you go to section 6, subsection 5, it does not mention Swahili language, but mention ancient languages, your Greek, your Hebrew, your Portuguese, and so forth. And as you know that most of us as Africans, our language relates to Swahili, but Swahili is disregarded, and you are telling me that this is the best constitution in the world. Coming to section 29, subsection 2, everyone has a right to receive education in the official languages of their own choice in public education institutions where that is reasonably practicable, and I've got a problem with that. But the point that I'm making, Program Director, is that when you go to the universities, we are taught in English. And who's benefiting historically even today is English and African students, and I'm expected to understand something that I don't understand. And the performance is otherwise. And we are told that the reason we're not performing is because we don't understand English. But what are you saying about those who are being taught from their from their mother tongue languages? For me, that's an unfair, just system that we are using. Needless to mention that even the books, we consume them in English, not in our vernacular languages. And today we are living in the artificial intelligence. The point I'm making here is that when you look at the AI, it can take a second to convert a book. So what I'm saying, Program Director, is that the Constitution must force a Department of Education, including the university, that when they are being supplied with books, they must make sure that in that agreement, the supplier accommodates all languages for fair reasons, even for me to improve my understanding and knowledge. Say, for instance, I don't understand, or I want to know how do they translate, or how it is being put in Ndebele or Xhosa. It's my matter of choice to choose that and understand what is being said there, rather than benefiting certain racial groups. Now, you see, when you go to section 32 of the Constitution, access to information, we are enforcing that right, but for me, we are living under now what we call technology. And I'm saying that right must be integrated in this clause, so that everyone has got access to technology as a human right, because it does not help that other people in other corners have got access to internet, because not all of us can afford it. But I'm saying at least access to information in the context of human rights must start at school and even at varsities, so that we're all at par when it comes to access to information. Section 35 of the Constitution, it explicitly gives prominence, protection to offenders. Those who have got Constitution, they could see that it starts from page 14 to page 16. And what is so contrary, there's nothing being mentioned about the witness, about the victim, instead of his right. And there's been a public outcry in this regard. And such position for me is subject to opportunism in the defense or court, and I'll explain it later. Then I'm saying, Program Director, that the section with this one, when we're improving it, it must integrate CCTV cameras on hot townships with crime. What do I mean by that? You see, in the context of eyewitness, I committed a crime in a township or in a suburb or in an urban area. But what happens is that the eyewitness does not want to go there because, as you know, that even whistleblowers are scared to go to court. And the cases are being delayed, or if not, they are being thrown away because there was no eyewitness. And imagine if you have got a CCTV camera, that information could be thrown and used in the court without having or relying on the eyewitness. By the way, for me, eyewitness is still the old Criminal Procedure Act that we are using. Unemployment. I don't want to bore you that much, even the entrepreneurship, but I'm just raising the issue of inequality. That those, if you have seen Stat SA, the unemployment rate is alarming and it's affecting youth. And where's the problem is this thing that when we are above age of 35, we are told that you are no longer fit for the market, despite of your degree and so forth. But in other sectors of economy, I thought the protesters were here. Because them too, they are accommodated. Professor Mngomezulu can be a president until 85 years. And there's nothing wrong with that. And he's getting salary from the same person that I'm supposed to get. So I'm just raising this issue of unfair employment through our labor laws. Needless to mention even the issue of these discriminatory laws that for you to get a job, you must have experience. Where I'm going to get it if I don't have it? You must have driver's license. And I'm coming from university. When I'm going to get that? So these things for me must be kind of fixed in the coming constitution. And I was watching elections. When you look at their campaign, they were campaigning against this thing of age of 35 years, that they are going to fix it. But I've been watching the parliament debate. It's not even there in the agenda. Now, I'm saying the constitution does not enforce equal entrepreneurship. Needless to mention, even a clause on local industrialization, manufacturing, and reference for me is COVID-19. South African priorities. What do I mean by that? We are always complaining that young into a processor outside. And I understand because there's nothing that is being mentioned in the constitution when it comes to manufacturing or industrialization. Take, for instance, the issue of COVID-19. All those things were coming from outside, but were at our own expense as South Africans, including the issue of Mhlonyana. We were using it, but we were told not to use it. It must come from Madagascar. So it then shows in my earlier presentation that our constitution is too westernized. It does not accommodate us as Africans. Let's go to South African breweries. It's a Westerner what alcohol and business. Africans have got their own mkomboti, but we don't have licenses. Immediately when you sell mkomboti, you will be arrested. Fortunately, I'm a product of mkomboti, hence I'm here. I'm saying, Program Director, that I'm sure even ladies, I think, will give me a big applaud in this regard. When it comes to gender representation, politics, and governance. Since apartheid until the advent of democracy, our political landscape in the context of head of state has been predominantly by males. This is against or undermines gender equality, yet there is no constitutional provision that enforces gender equality and this level to leverage rights of women at Concord level. This makes women to be perpetually subsidiary or mute. Let me pause a little bit. I know that there will be debates about politics, votes, and so forth. But my question is, when are we going to deal with the gender representation? Unless we've got a clause in the Constitution. Check the model of interviews from affirmative action and employment equity. You have got Ngengelezi, who's a male. But because Ngengelezi is number one and a woman is number two, they will take number two just to implement or enforce those laws. It's the same philosophy that must be preached even when it comes to our political landscape. And I'm saying, Program Director, that Section 19, when it comes to political rights, must improve to integrate these issues that I'm referring to, including regulating new forms of government such as coalition, GNU, for service delivery purposes. You know what is happening now in our municipalities. You have got the mayor tomorrow is being removed at whose expense? At the expense of service delivery. And for me, this must be regulated in the Constitution. Let me go to case laws. Section 11 of the Constitution states that everyone has a right to life. Then Section 27, Subsection 1 states that everyone has a right to access to health services, including reproductive care. And I've got a problem with this section. Section 27.2 states that the state must take reasonable legislative and other means. So what I'm trying to say here is that despite what is being mentioned above, provided there is budget or resources. But let's go to the case of Subramani versus Minister of Health in KwaZulu-Natal. How was frustrated by this clause? That she brought a constitutional application seeking an order for hospital to provide him with access to dialysis treatment. The High Court dismissed his application in support of the department that there are no resources, and he eventually dies. Then the question is, how do you balance the right to life when you are even not supported by the last court in the land? Hence, I call these clauses as glorified or cashing rights without realizing benefits. It's like buying a car for a crying partner, but you don't give me a key. It's like you are decreasing or reducing petrol, but food is still expensive, bus fare is still expensive. But it's precisely because of this clause that I'm referring to. You go to the state versus Mashumba, same right when it comes to everyone that has got a right to life. I'll just summarize in this way. Imagine my sister, you are fully pregnant, but the baby father does not want a child. He decides to connive with his friends to organize a robbery incident. But he instructs them that they must shoot him on the shoulder and they must shoot the mother in the abdomen. And the baby died. But listen to the judgment. The court refused to bring in the term of murder to an unborn child because there is no constitutional provision afforded to an unborn child. How do you feel? That's the best question in the world. Just say it out loud. How do you feel? Bad. Yes. But the court even refused to develop the common law crime of murder to include a futures and referred this issue to the legislature to address it. So now there's a blame game. Hence, I'm saying there are many implications about this judgment, that there's injustice of the Constitution, blame game between the drafters of the Constitution and the interpreters of the Constitution, that's the judiciary, GBV, cultural and religious. It undermines us, including the definition of law of persons from a future stage. Let me just pause a little bit. As Africans, when my partner goes for a miscarriage, we do the rituals. We even give a name to that child. But this constitution does not do that. It tells you that for you or for that child to be a human being, he or she must be born. They disregard that, and you are saying this is the best constitution in the world. So, by the way, it does not protect, or it gives us the license as males to say, if I don't want a child, then I must kill it. And program director, you see, I went to look at section 39, 1B and C. Section 39, 1B states that when you are interpreting law, you must consider international law. And C states that you must consider foreign law. And I did look at other countries in this regard to say what's their position. It's simple, it's murder. But I don't know what happened in this judgment. But we are saying that this is the best constitution in the world. The last case is around section 26, subsection 1, that everyone has the right to have a right to adequate housing. Again, I've got a problem with the same section that I've mentioned, that provided there are resources. So in the context of of the government of the Republic of South Africa and others versus Grootboom, what happened is that Mrs. Grootboom died while she was waiting for a house, which the state failed to take reasonable measures. She died despite that the court ruled in her favor. Let's go to section 237 of the Constitution when it comes to performance and legal consequences. The section refers to diligence performance, that all constitutional obligations must be performed diligently without a delay. This clause has, but my problem is this clause has got no legal consequences, and such is toothless with regard to assisting AG on audit reports. So the point I'm making here is that the Constitution is very silent when it comes to poor performance, including other things that have not been mentioned. Hence, I'm saying this clause, the Constitution, the new Constitution must try to enforce this law so that we have got that state obligation that has got legal consequences. My way forward, Program Director, that we need a Constitution that has got an African flair or posture. At the same time, we need a Constitution that is fit for purpose against two-thirds majority, because GNU has shown that different political parties from different ideologies can work together through their agreement. But again, I'm asking or I'm pleading for a clause that will review the Constitution. There's no way that we can stay with the Constitution of 30 years and we're saying everything is okay. I'm saying because when we're drafting the Constitution, there were issues that we did not anticipate that they would happen, all these issues that I've mentioned. I'm saying more focus should be on relevance with reality. Section 25 in economic rights, shared economy must be emphasized. Those who read the Bible, a man once asked Jesus to say, how can I enter the kingdom of God? God said, only if you can share your treasures. And that's the spirit of the Constitution that we must enforce. There must be protection of rights and civil rights of the victims. Lesson from the tribal court system. They must also access to internet as human rights, giving data to schools, gadgets for learners. And of course, artificial intelligence must be used. There must be prioritization of crime, hotspot, township with CCTV cameras. And the issue of languages must be relooked, including sign language that must be enforced throughout the schools, including Swahili that must be promoted in the Constitution. And of course, this thing of 35 years, the Constitution must start to do something about that because it creates a lot of unemployment. There must be free rights, housing, education when it comes to disabled people, because we have not done justice to this group of people. Including the issue of gender equality when it comes to women, when it comes to politics and head of state. I'm saying we don't need an animal farm example for an uncalculated revolution such as xenophobia, free education, and so forth. I know in South Africa, we are so reactionary. Take, for instance, the issue of bursaries that people were complaining about it, to say there must be free education. It was only enforced when students went to boycott and build and destroy the buildings of universities. So we don't need those kind of such things. In conclusion, we need a head, a heart, and hands leadership. What do I mean by that? Only open mind that get real wisdom, only open heart that get real love, and only open hands that get real gifts. Let's think. Let's do this out of love, but let's show the result on the ground. And I'm saying, Program Director, through our heart leadership, and hand leadership in the concept of time, as Mandela said, we must use time wisely and forever. Realize that the time is always right to do right, especially to correct what is wrong in the Constitution. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Masuku, for that presentation. Can I please have the problem? For that presentation, I think for those of us who did first year of LLB, we recognize South African foundations of law, we recognize law of persons, we recognize all of these various, and of course the interpretation of statutes as part of those discussions that you are having with us. I'm going to allow our respondent, Dr. Adelaide Karomo, who is from the Equality, Promotion and Social Inclusion Coordinator and Transformation Office from the Nelson Mandela University, to respond for about 15 minutes. Thereafter, we'll open up for Q&A. I know some of you have been prompted by a lot of the discussion that we've heard from Dr. Masugu in the initial parts of his presentation, and we're going to engage. I think it's an interesting discussion, specifically also about where does this responsibility of enforcement lie. Some of the provisions that he spoke about are enabling in nature, but it seems as though no one's taking the responsibility. So I'm going to ask for the respondent to please join us. A round of applause for her, please. She's going to give us a presentation for about 15 minutes, and then we'll have our Q&A. Thank you.
Okay, good evening, everyone. Please bear with me. My thoughts are jumbled up in my notes here. Hopefully, I am able to flow in the same eloquent and extremely powerful manner that our previous speaker has been able to speak. Congratulations, Doc, and well done. I feel like I've been thrown under the bus by Prof. Gomezulo. I have come in at the last minute to stand in as a respondent, so obviously that cut my preparation time short. But a lot of what I'll speak about today, yes, backed with some provisions of the Constitution and some on the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, a lot is based on my knowledge on the Bill of Rights over the last few years. Some of you will know that I have experience lecturing that module at this university as well. So just to reflect or to recap again on the questions that were invoked upon us and which were spoken about at quite length in the keynote, is the South African Constitution still relevant or fit for purpose? In responding to the keynote, I think I'll take us through our preamble just to see what the purpose was when we look at legal interpretation. What was the purpose at the time of drafting? Does that purpose resonate with us in this room today? And then to look at whether the South African Constitution serves South Africans. That question, I think, in also responding is also then key for us to understand who is a rights bearer in terms of the Constitution, who is meant to bear rights in terms of the Constitution. Is it just for South African citizens? Who does it apply to? So I'll delve into that a bit, and then on to some of the points. I can't obviously get to all of them, which were spoken about in the keynote of what is wrong with the Constitution. I do agree with most of the points that were stipulated. I do have some reflections in terms of some of the points that were stipulated. And then the other question is, does the Constitution accommodate African values? That I tend to deal with by looking at a comparative engagement between, for instance, the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which is said to be a one-of-its-kind document with the Afrocentric approach. Does our Constitution mimic a similar languaging to the African Charter on Human and People's Rights? So in responding, I will go through that briefly. What we can do to ensure that the Constitution best serves our needs, I think our keynote speaker has thoroughly given us some reflections on that, to which I'm not opposed. So let's get to it. What was the purpose for which our Constitution was drafted. I tend to carry my Constitution with me. For my students that are in the room, you know that I require you to have this for all our lectures. So, what was it drafted for? What is the preamble? What does it read? It reads, "We, the people of South Africa, recognize the injustices of our past, honor those who suffered for justice and freedom in our land, respect those who have worked to build and develop our country, and believe that South Africa belongs to all who live in it, united in our diversity. We therefore, through our freely elected representatives, adopt this Constitution as the supreme law of the Republic, so as to heal the divisions of the past and establish a society based on democratic values, social justice, and fundamental human rights. Lay the foundation for a democratic and open society in which government is based on the will of the people and every citizen is equally protected by the law. Improve the quality of life of all citizens and free the potential of each person, and build a united and democratic South Africa able to take its rightful place as a sovereign state in the family of nations." And then the biblical reference comes in of "May God protect our people," translated into other versions. So I pose this question as well in response to, is that purpose, as read in the preamble, what we resonate with now? Do we consider ourselves still a rainbow nation, united in our diversity? Is that the message that we want our rights to fundamentally reflect? Are we in the process of healing the divisions of the past? As our keynote has said, have we extensively acknowledged the divisions of our past? Have we then acknowledged those that helped to build this country, even those who came from other neighboring countries, those who also assisted us in obtaining our freedom? To what extent then is that reflected in the rights entrenched in the Constitution? So I know our keynote has spoken a lot about how, as much as we might have this preamble that gives the strengthened message, what came next in terms of the rights that were entrenched more or less favored an already favored position. Is that indeed the situation? We begin to look at some of those rights. I know our keynote spoke a bit about the fact that we have an absence of a clause that deals with gender equality. We know specifically that our pre-democratic era, what the position of women were in this country, to be able to take leadership positions as well as to occupy certain careers. How then does the Bill of Rights deal with this? Well, Section 9, which is then the first constitutional right entrenched in the Constitution, the right to equality, is meant then to deal with such questions such as gender equality. What is the languaging of Section 9, the right to equality? I'll specifically skip to Section 9(1), which says everyone is equal before the law and has the right to equal protection and benefit of the law, right? And then subsections 3 and 4 specifically place responsibilities on both the state and on individuals not to unfairly discriminate based on what is called then the listed grounds. Okay? We might ask ourselves, where did those listed grounds come from? Those listed grounds include, for instance, race, gender, sex, pregnancy, marital status, disability, religion, conscious belief, culture, language, birth, and so forth. Those ones, obviously, when we look at our past, were amongst the grounds on which people were segregated and treated differently, and violence was impacted upon. If we look at our international law, for instance, if we look at the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, as well as the Convention on Civil and Political Rights, the Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights, that same language is followed in terms of what these listed grounds are. But still, how does this address the issue of gender equality? It then brings you then to subsection 2, which reads, equality includes the full and equal enjoyment of all rights and freedoms. To promote the achievement of equality, which means the Constitution is acknowledging that we are not equal, hence the wording achievement of equality, which we might want to aid and say the transformative nature is coming out there, must take legislative and other measures designed to protect or advance persons or categories of persons disadvantaged by unfair discrimination. So, yes, the Constitution does make provision for gender equality, but then it shifts back to what our facilitator was saying, who then must take up the role to ensure that this gender equality is achieved. Who then has the mandate of drafting legislative and other measures to ensure the achievement of equality? Is it then not those that we elect? What does the Constitution say as far as the responsibilities of the state to ensure that rights are fulfilled? So, will the redrafting or reviewing of this Constitution alone fix the problem that we have with enforcement? Let's look at the wording in section 7, subsection 2. The state must respect, protect, promote, and fulfill the rights in the Bill of Rights. That then includes both negative and positive obligations on the state. You might then ask, who is the state? You know then the different organs or structures of the state, the legislature, the executive, and the judiciary, but you also know that there's the principle of separation of powers, which stipulates what each sphere is responsible for. So not only must the state not infringe or interfere with whatever rights we put in here, there must be a positive action to do something to ensure that our rights are fulfilled. Is that indeed not the fight that we should be fighting at this stage? I'm not saying the Constitution is not flawed, but how much of this debate are we having as far as enforcement is concerned, as opposed to review? I'm not opposed to review, I say again, please don't kill me. Okay? So that's one of the reflections that I wanted to include there. Another one that our keynote speaker spoke about is the need for review of the Constitution to also reflect the change in times. For instance, the advancement in technology and so forth, and how the access to internet should also, or the equitable access to internet should also be included as a constitutional right, coupled with the right to information. And I don't disagree at all. The thing then to understand with that is, as our keynote mentioned as well, is that that will form part of a socio-economic right, such as how, for instance, electricity is not included in the Constitution, equitable access to electricity, which, given our crisis, we might want to include, right? But these are socio-economic rights. Similarly to Section 26, which we heard as well, the right to housing. And I think that was a very pertinent point, Keynote, where you spoke about the rebuilding of homesteads. That is extremely powerful. It's something I hadn't actually thought about. But this languaging in socio-economic rights that places this proviso that the state must adopt legislative and other means to progressively realize these rights over time, which means unlike civil and political rights, socio-economic rights are not immediately realizable, right? This then follows a similar language that you would see in the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. But with the case law Keynote that you were speaking about, for instance, Subramani, those cases were heard before the ratification of the International Convention on Economic, Social, and Cultural Rights. South Africa was quite slow to ratify that convention, and part of the reasons, I stand to be corrected, was because the commission of the convention has come up with something known as the minimum core, or the minimum standard. And that is the major point of the rejection when it comes to case law on social and economic rights. That we, as the state, tend to run and say, but we are a developing African state, we have no money. Now if you tell us what the minimum standard is, that I must provide each person with 100 liters of water per day, you're putting an erroneous burden on me as an African state to be able to achieve this. Is that the wording in the Constitution that rejects the minimum core? Who rejected the minimum core? Coming back to the issue of, are we holding the right actors responsible? Why was there that delay in that ratification? Yes, it has now been ratified. It would be interesting to see what the jurisprudence would be. But again, coming to separation of powers, even if such a matter on social and economic rights is to find its way or land its way in the courts, the highest court, the Constitutional Court, coming back to separation of powers, what is the role of judges? It must still send back this unconstitutional provision that doesn't make regard for minimum core back somewhere. Will they be held accountable for non-compliance? Becomes the question. The judges can't essentially say, which is another reason why there's a difficulty with socioeconomic rights, what exactly must be afforded to each person, because it doesn't have the budgetary know-how. That sits with the executive, for example. How do we hold those departments accountable? So that is something I wanted to respond when it came to socio-economic rights. And then when it comes to Section 25, the land issue, I'm not opposed to anything you've said, Keynote. I wish not to debate on whether there must be compensation or not, because we know that this is a highly sensitive issue. And as we said, if we look again at the preamble, which says we wish to heal the injustices of the past, does that then not bring premise for expropriation without compensation? Because when it was taken, there was no monetary value given? I don't know. I leave that for our debate. But just to mention on the point, Keynote, where you said, for instance, during the colonial times, livestock was also taken from indigenous peoples, and the Constitution does not fully reflect other forms of property besides land. If we read section 25, subsection 4b, it does spell out that property in terms of the rights stipulated in section 25 are not only exclusive to land. It might not specifically mention livestock, but there's room for interpretation to include other forms of property that were also unlawfully taken away from indigenous peoples. So that is something that we might want to look at. Am I still good on time or? Okay. So just for me to quickly wrap up, what's wrong with the Constitution, quickly? As I said, a comparative read between the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, which is an Afrocentric document. Does the Constitution reflect African values? Keynote correctly said, it's silent on Ubuntu. It's been up to the courts to read in the value of Ubuntu into the Constitution, but it cannot be found anywhere in the Constitution. The founding values can be found in section 1, you can read. But if you read the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, for instance, I'll just skim through some of the parts. From the preamble, it says then, it must be the duty of a state to promote and protect human and people's rights and the freedoms, taking into account the importance traditionally attached to these rights and freedoms in Africa. So we did have a way of respecting and honoring human rights before this legal system was imposed upon us. We must also take into account those knowledges when protecting and promoting rights. But something also so significant about the the Charter on Human and People's Rights is the fact that it not only lists rights, but also lists collective and individual obligations, which the Constitution does not do. So as far as obligations are concerned, generally you read about it in quite a flowery language in Section 8 and Section 7, but the Human and People's Rights Charter specifically lays out what obligations we also have as people, as a collective, to ensure the promotion of rights. It also has a collective nature and regulates the right to development, which we see is silent in the Constitution. It doesn't have the proviso that it must be taken into account within reasonable legislative and budgetary measures, which is an upside that this document has that our Constitution does not reflect. But yeah, I'll park there. There's so much that we can talk about. We can spend the whole day, but I look forward to the Q&A. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karomo, for your response and engagement with Dr. Masuku's presentation. Perhaps before I open up to the floor as well as the online questions, let's start with you, Dr. Masuku, on some of the key insights that we've gotten from Dr. Karomo in her reflection. Are we asking the wrong question? Are we misdiagnosing the problem? Are we placing the burden on the wrong institution? And I speak about the Constitution as an institution itself. It has its own court. Essentially, you have to ensure that we abide by it. Are we trying to fix our political problems through legislating them away? Yes.
Thank you, Program Director. The word that she used, words. For me, you see, when you look at the Constitution, it has been a pilot project. And after 30 years, those things that were promised, from empirical evidence, there are things that have been done, but much has not been done. So it then goes back to say, look, we need to give a new fresh in our constitution. Because to some extent, I use the metaphor of dating. That when you look at the character of our constitution, you'll understand historically that when you go for dating, those who are romantic, there are things that you don't say in a date because you want to charm this partner, even though we are not happy about it. That's the character of our constitution. Now we are talking about freedom of rights. The ground is open. We need to put more flesh into it. That's how I can respond to your question.
As a follow-up, perhaps...
Sorry, secondly.
Yeah, sure.
You're asking, it should be the Constitution that should respond. Yes, but to some extent, there is a blame game within the arms of state. Hence, I'm raising the issue of Section 237. That is too soft, that there should be no delay of service delivery. In other sections, it says any legislation that is not consistent with the Bill of Rights is invalid. For me, it's too soft. Then what? Hence, I'm raising to say we need legal consequences so that you don't do willy-nilly. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Prof. Doc, sorry. I think when Dr. Karomo, when Dr. Masuku was speaking, a lot of what he was presenting was speaking about the idea that the Constitution needs to enable and essentializing sort of belonging and ownership. And as someone who facilitates a lot of these engagements in different communities, a lot of what we find is that communities don't claim the Constitution as their own. They don't feel like it's theirs, and part of what Dr. Masuku spoke about was the idea that even the common law is based on Roman Dutch law, for instance. How do we buy into a document that we don't feel is our own? And part of what he talked about in his presentation was the idea that even in placing us on this continent, the Constitution in its founding principles, in talking about our linguistic heritage, speaks about Eurocentric ideas of Greek and all of these other languages, but it doesn't mention things like Swahili, which is ultimately the thing that ought to be binding us as a continent. How do we incentivize ownership and belonging? If you think about political parties, for instance, as soon as someone wrongs a specific element of that constitution, they no longer believe in the idea and the value of that instrument. In the same vein, surely as South Africans, we have a right to claim that that's not ours.
Thank you so much. I think that's why I started with the preamble, and I posed the question to the room of to what extent do we identify ourselves with what the purpose is of the Constitution? And I agree so much with what Doc is saying in that one of the major reasons why we're failing to find a buy-in with the Constitution, like I said, I'm not saying it's not a flawed document. There is a lot that was left out at the time, but I like to think of the Constitution as a seed. The extent to which that seed grows and becomes a plant, a tree, is the carry-on process, the passing of the torch. But the main reason why we're not seeing a buy-in is because, like Doc said, 30 years post this document, the lives of people have not changed. South Africa still remains the most unequal country in the world. So again, to answer that, I ask again, to what extent are we holding the institutions, the people that we put in power to actually make this a living document? And yes, we can review, we can amend, but still, will that fix the problem of implementation?
Yeah, thank you very much. An interesting one is that the Constitution, as you said, Dr. Karomo, doesn't preclude that we can't have a review. It doesn't say that we shouldn't be doing that. And what you also said, Dr. Masuku, the idea that when we're thinking about reviewing the Constitution, we think about this two-thirds majority, and it's the big animal we all need to tackle. And we think about surely certain parties or a certain party in particular has had the opportunity but didn't do so. But also what you speak about, Dr. Masuku, now as part of your response is the idea of consequences is not clearly spelled out in the Constitution. Is it the document to be doing that? Should other enabling legislation to be formed? And ultimately then the question always comes back to this question of judges. Judges aren't going to be the ones writing those laws. It's going to be the same people we're electing. So we're stuck in a catch-22. So are we at a loss as a country? Is there hope for some change? Dr. Masuku?
Look, there is hope for the country. I'm saying that hope yet lies with the youth that you see. Hence, if you see my first slide, the question that I was posing in that question mark, have we responded honestly and frankly to say we are now an equal society? So they must bring the fresh mind. Hence, I'm questioning that labor laws when it comes to age above 35.
Yeah.
That it disregards youth. As you know that when you bring them in the market, they come with fresh minds. So long if we can do that, for me, we can give more hope to this youth. Thank you.
Thank you very much. And of course, Dr. Karoma, as part of your responses, you did speak about the idea of second generational rights. When it comes to housing, healthcare, there's this thing that we say we must have progressive realization. But of course, progressive realization, as part of what you were also mentioning, isn't just a free-for-all. A government has to show that they're doing as much as they can when it goes to court, unfortunately. Do you feel like the fact that it has to go to court in order to be tested is a problem in of itself, that our judicial system, our laws are too administrative in nature and ultimately exclude certain voices as a result of that?
Yes, but I think also in the enabling legislation, because remember there must be legislative measures that are taken to fulfill that progressive realization. To what extent are we, including the youth, effectively participating in the legislative process? When these drafts go for public comment, are we exercising that right, or then do we just complain when this thing is passed and say, but now look, this thing is not, fulfilling my rights? Then obviously once something is passed, you have to go through the court process to have it then tested and declared unconstitutional. But before that process, are we actively letting our voices be heard?
Yeah. Dr. Masuku, you want to respond to that?
It reminds me, former Chief Justice Mogoeng Mogoeng, when he said, our judiciary is full of cases that are not supposed to be here. Most of them they're supposed to do with at Parliament. We end up dealing with political issues and neglecting the service of the judiciary.
Yeah.
One must be integrated.
Yeah.
And of course, when you go to tribal courts, there's a lot that we can learn from there. There are cases that AMACOS can assist with without going to court in this Western court that we're referring to. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Let's turn it over now to Ulucha, or Prof, probably not counted as part of that. But we're going to turn to you in the room as well as online. If you have any direct questions for both our keynote as well as respondent, please feel free to get closer to our mic. We do need you to be on the mic for purposes of the live stream. I've seen the 2 hands there, 3. 4 for now. Those are all males. I hope that the next round of hands will have other engaged in the question and answer session. Your name and question, please, or comment.
Thank you very much. My name is Kananelo Mputi, former SRC member of Mandela. It's very important. I must post.
Is it as a result of these elections that are happening right now?
No. The students must hear the quality that was removed in favor of what we have now. Look, thank you very much for the opportunity. Dr. Karomo, and Dr. Masuku. Mine is, how do we toe the line of trying to review the Constitution and being referred to by the liberalists as anti-constitutionalist? So, for example, we have an issue of land question that the Constitution holds back. The Constitution holds back the process of us getting back the land. How do we review that particular clause without sounding anti-constitutional, as the liberals refer to us? And then secondly, there's this idea that we have come to see as is false, it's farcical to say the least, that South Africa has, I think they say the most liberal,
most progressive, yeah.
they are most impressive, most liberal, most. So how do we review, as a constitution, how do we review a document that has been referred to as so biblical, so beautiful, without sounding like, we're being too drastic about this thing, we're being anti-constitutional. So basically, anti-constitutionalism. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much for your question. Yes, the second question, please.
Yeah, thank you. Is it working, this thing? Yeah. But my voice is enough.
We can hear you, Chief. We can hear you.
No, my name is Buhle Kauka. Yes, like every black person in this country, in the Lipara, landless, I have nothing. So my question is going to Dr. Masuku, and then maybe the last one will go to Dr. Karum. Similarly to the previously asked question, what is even the role or the possibility of fairness of the Constitution and democracy to a settler state where the indigenous people remain marginalized? Considering of all the recent developing politics, contemporary politics, just recently, a few days ago, we had a former chief judge of the Western Cape Division, Utumbeza, Judge Klopp, of whom was elected democratically to be part of the legislature, and then is eligible to go and represent in that committee. Don't even know the law things. So, my main question is on the historical side in the contemporary politics, to assure that there is fairness between the historically oppressed and those who are continued to oppressed, and those who are historically benefiters of the apartheid system. To Dr. Karum. You spoke about gender equality. So, and then you mostly spoke about the marginalization of women. So now, in our current society, as South Africa, in fact, as black people in Africa and diaspora, would you say that black women, are they black before they are women? Are they women before they are black? Equally, no. When I'm landing, on the culture side, we do know of what has the history done to the African people. So, it goes to all the panelists. What would we call a constitution that is leaning towards an African culture at the moment? Because now there's also a Christianization of Africa, or Islamization of Africa, where now the religion maybe is even reigning supreme, even among those who are claiming that they are fighting for Afrocentric views. You find that even themselves, they are religiousized. Yeah,
thank you very much for your questions. I think our speakers have captured them. The third question, and then we'll go to the final question for this round. We'll have another round of questions after that.
Yeah. Thanks, Program Director. My name is Mandla Matwaha from New Brighton. I think what probably we have not explained, Program Director, is the allocation of time to Q&A.
Sure.
Versus the time that we have allocated to the panelists in relation to this critical topic. I think you need to be fair on us when it comes to that. That's the first thing.
Yeah.
The second thing, I think the doc, what probably he's saying, the gist of what he said is an experience of 30 years of frustration. And as such, he tended to join the rest of the people who who actually are so tempted to throw everything at the Constitution.
Yeah.
But fortunately, he has answered himself partly to say other things were not anticipated, and as such, he's more talking about the lived experience. But on the preamble, what probably maybe the Prof could have done was to unpack the injustice of the past. What is the nature of that past? So that question, whether the Constitution talks, is relevant and so on. Because we have an experience of 342 years of colonialism, injustice, and as such, during the evolution of colonialism since those days to up until 1994, how inequality also has been embedded to date. And yet, we think that will make a magic in 30 years. Doesn't happen. I think why this probably Constitution is being praised, before I go to my question, is a transitional tool, given where we're coming from and its good intentions. But also, in his input, he seems to have exonerated the people that were supposed to implement these good intentions, which Dr. Karumo has actually lifted. And as such, I would say, such topics, you can't ignore the history of these 240 years. Probably what maybe we failed, which is my question now, is our Marshall Plan, our NDP, which I guess derives all its intention from this very Constitution itself. Yeah. Why should it not, our Marshall Plan, be embedded or appendixed in the very Constitution itself? So that whoever comes in power every 5 years, right? Because there's the South African expectations of reversing this inequality or clawback, we only rely on this a periodic 5 years, which I think also is an illusion. Why not, therefore, our Marshall Plan that will probably address all these other issues, which the Constitution cannot?
Yeah, thank you.
So why can't, therefore, our Marshall Plan for the next 100 years be embedded so that whoever is in power is obliged to actually implement what is in the Constitution? Lastly, Chairperson, Program Director, could you imagine in the past 15 years, especially the so-called 10 years of wasted when the state was captured, if all the powers, or we had a parliamentary system, versus what we have right now? Because sometimes we don't have that appreciation. And we must give that to the Mandelas that we so tempted to criticize for everything that is going wrong today. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much. The last hand, can you remind me who was the last hand? Oh, there we go, for this round.
Good evening, everyone. Speaking is Sipesihle, and not a politician. Is the concern, it's not a question from Dr. Masuku when he mentioned something about the book of Non-Racialism, the story of Non-Racialism, or on how we lost land. But today we don't hear those type of things from the media, social media that we use. We call, I think in World War III, in a way of the digital matter, mind of perception in a way that everything that we get from social media is distracting us. We no longer hear about those things. So that's the thing.
Yeah, thank you very much. So we no longer hear about the stories of our own people, of our own founding, essentially. Can I start with you, and then I'll go to Dr. Masuku to.
Okay. Yeah, some interesting questions, but I think I'll just respond briefly to the question of how do you review something that is considered to be the best in the world? Well, obviously, based on our discussion today, we're obviously trying to determine to what extent is this transitional document, I guess, assisting us in the transition. So that would be the basis of why we are reviewing. It's not because we are anti-constitution, but it's because we are trying, as Doc said, maybe to include maybe a harsher obligation on those that we elect and put in power to give effect, to promote, to fulfill the values in the Constitution, as well as the rights in the Constitution. And although holistically it may be regarded as the best in the world, as we've already mentioned in the keynote and in the response, that it does lack certain strong reference to African principles, which, for instance, Doc also said about family institutions. And I'd just like to quickly make a cross-reference again. If you read the African Charter on Human and People's Rights, if you read Article 18, it specifically talks about family institutions and the role of the state to support family institutions to reflect the principles and morals of African people. So the fact that some of those aspects are excluded does give us a certain ground to review, to say this assists us in our sense of belonging and our sense of ownership. So that doesn't make us anti-constitutional. The heated question of when it comes to gender equality and we speak about marginalization, are black women black first and then women after? That is a very difficult question because, again, not specifically in the Constitution, but if we look at it in terms of the Employment Equity Act that was drafted to give effect to Section 9, who is black or what is black? What does that mean? Just to the audience, who is black? What? An African person.
Everyone that's not white.
Everyone that is not white.
All right, thank you.
But if we look at the history of marginalization,
Not the one who could not sit in those chairs.
hence I said that one I leave for you. That one is too much of a heated one for me to go
All right.
into.
People who couldn't sit in those chairs, we know, for instance, the tricameral parliament was formed in the mid-1980s, but was it 1984? Ngesimo Sibkai is what they called it, the state of emergency that we had in this country. They were trying to create a room for certain voices in the room. Okay, Dr. Masuku, your responses to some of those questions. I can see even the responses are gaining traction in the room.
Okay, thank you, and thanks for the questions. It's a very heated debate, and I said earlier on, Program Director, you put us on a spotlight in this topic because there are things, because it's about simple things that we're supposed to talk about, but when you say it, you are being racist, you are being anti-revolution, you are attacking the judiciary. So we are expected, in a sense, like to nest issues. Professor Mkhize, there's this Xhosa word, I like it. in relation to AmaZulu. Uthi amaqobhoka ne abantu ababomvu kwaZulu thina sithi amabhinqa. Amabhinqa abantu abangifundanga, they speak the truth. Thina we sugarcoat matters. Yes. No, amaqaba, we are being illiterate. It's an insult word. We'll discuss about that. But anyway,
There's snacks afterwards.
I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you. I want to challenge you.
Yeah.
I want to challenge you. One of the debates in the session by, I think he was invited here, Ubaba Bijani. He challenged the law students that on the Mandela case, that I don't see that thing happening. I mean, I don't see any kind of consumption of knowledge in that case, in law. And I'm trying to salvage myself to all those questions that you have asked. I think let's challenge ourselves what this constitution is all about in the context of the rule of law that we want to see. But honestly, when it comes to the SRC question about this liberalist approach, the beauty of the Constitution, and my response to this, we need to be honest ourselves. Let's not sugarcoat matters. As I made a metaphor of going to a date, that there are things that you don't say, and that was the character of our politics. But at the same time, we need a new CODESA. And the new CODESA are the new generation. Just to go and reflect and engage them. And they must be allowed, not certain group, your what you call, your intellectuals, the few, because as they are sitting in hotels, they don't discuss this issue as robust as you are. And for me, I think that is lacking. Come to the question of who is black. It's a very philosophical question for me to answer. But again, it then raises the concern to say, can you be honest about this representation? When you look at the percentages, taking into account the history, because others, they took advantage of the system post-1994. That's the truth. But again, I made a reference deliberately. I was trying to provoke, because I was told that they are politicians. The issue of Section 19 of the Constitution, juxtaposing with Section 9 when it comes to gender representation. That when it comes to head of states in South Africa, or in Africa, by the way, from apartheid till now, especially in South Africa, we never had a head of state as a woman. And I even said, I understand that you'll go to politics and maybe this SRC and so forth, to say, but we did not vote for her. But I'm saying, if you can use the approach of affirmative action and employment equity in this context, that Umasuku got number 1 in that position, Udok got number 2 as a woman. You then say in those interviews, no, because we are pushing affirmative action and employment equity, we take her as a woman. It's the same approach that needs to be adopted into politics too, so that the question that you are asking in this reference to black woman, the head of state must deal with those issues. Because for me, as males at times, we try to accommodate ourselves. That's the truth. Now, coming to the question of specifically, media does not cover the issue of land and so forth. It's a very quite interesting question that you are asking, and it's true. But I don't think that you were here when I was presenting, when even my tone was trying to be high when it comes to the issue of land, to say we have not done the justice here. Many things were taken, not taken, were stolen, but we were afraid to talk about even in the Constitution, because those who are in research, they say your problem statement must be very clear, so that when you come to a problem of action, your hypothesis, you are addressing the problem. But the Constitution, to some extent, hide that right. So, hence, I'm saying, as long as we can be honest ourselves. But let's go to the issue of resources, because at times we are saying we don't have money. You see, the state capture has proven that there's money in South Africa. the issue of underspending, where you send money back to treasury, has proven that there's money in South Africa. I think we need to start to explore those avenues, to say no. Let's look at these matters, because this is the evidence in front of us. Thank you.
Yeah. Before both of you rest and I take 4 more hands, can I just insert this question? So there was a question about whether the preamble and what it articulates in that, is our constitution fit for purpose? Do we elucidate enough what the challenges were, and ultimately, does the constitution go far enough in resolving those things? Dr. Karumo or Dr. Masuku, either of you.
Okay. Yes, I did read the preamble out, and it speaks about, thank you, about how it sets to heal the injustices of the past and honor those that suffered for justice and freedom. Yes, I do agree there isn't, however, an acknowledgement of the extent of the attainment of that freedom. As I even said, it doesn't acknowledge those who came even from other African countries to support us in the movement of freedom. It doesn't acknowledge fully what the injustices were, which I think is Doc's problem as well with Section 25, in terms of maybe the toned down way that the issue of property, not just land, because as I said, Section 25 goes beyond just land. So other forms of property that were stolen during the colonial times must also then be addressed. But as I think one of the comments were, this was meant to be a transitional document. To what extent then did the enabling legislation that was supposed to carry the torch, for instance, to deal with the issue of land, to what extent will it then expand on what the injustices were, the motivation for how this land is to be expropriated and so forth? Is that a task that we can fully expect from the Constitution? Is that not an overly burdensome task that will leave us, for instance, with a 1,500-word document that can easily be addressed in enabling legislation? I don't know.
Thank you very much, Dr. Karomo. Before you respond, Dr. Masuku, can I take a couple of hands from the floor so that we can be able to move right along? We are sitting at 23 minutes past 7. We were hoping to finish at exactly past, but we're going to finish at 8 for the purposes of the live stream as well. What additional questions do we have? There's one hand at the back. I'm going to take people who haven't spoken yet for now, unless there are no other. 2, 3. Colleagues who are female, are you not? You know, and I make, so I'm of the fees must fall generation. In 2015, 2016, I'm sure all of you know and have read the literature about it, but part of the discourse was also that there was a time in the movement, in the fees must fall movement, when the question of gender, LGBTQ, became problematized because of the patriarchal nature of the ways in which some of the student leaders were enacting themselves. So when the question of are you female before you're black, I think you ask it, you're provoking us. We are stunuga. And so it's important that we capture some of those peculiarities quite accurately. I'm happy for us to talk about it when we're having snacks afterwards. Sorry for those of you who are online. Hopefully you have something prepared for yourself. So we've got the 3 hands, and then 4. I'll close with you, sir, since no one else wants to take the opportunity. Okay, yes, sir.
Benfunubuza mna Doc Masuku on the question of separation of powers. If the president and the Minister of Justice are the ones that appoint the members of the NPA, the directors, and also they are the ones who appoint the Chief Justice, which are offices in the judiciary, do you think that is not undermining the separation of powers. Also, I wanted to ask on the Section 181 institutions, the Auditor General, to be precise, what are the measures that they are to take when they make their findings? Because you'd find out that, for instance, last year, the Department of Education in the Eastern Cape underspent 400 million. Department of Education, yet we have so many problems in that sector. So now, what are the measures do they take when they find those findings? Thank you.
Thank you very much. The second question, please. Sorry, can we start? Can we go in the line? Sorry, Mnumzan. Yeah, go for it. Yes.
Okay. Greetings. I just wanted to find out. There's been a talk about the 2/3 majority for there maybe to be a change in the constitution, something like that. Now, I'm gonna track back because there's something I read from Open Secrets that talks about how the apartheid state was working in procuring arms and all of those scandals, and then we went to post-apartheid, and then still there was state capture. And now we can't look at it from, there was a white guy and black guy, they all worked together, and the banks, all of them. So would there be ever be a 2/3 majority to ever change anything if it works for those in power?
Yeah, we have an oligarchy ruled by the elites, essentially. Is it really democratic if those people can collaborate to do the extent of harm that they've done over the past, 10 years, but over the past 30 years? At every point, Aswan, landless, Mapara, as you guys call it. Yes, the third question.
No, thank you very much, Program Director. No, look, I'll be honest, né?
Sure.
We have been having these constitutional discussions, all right? We even had one there at Centenary Hall about Section 25, all right? But nothing comes out of this. So it goes to show that the Constitution is not doing what it's supposed to do, all right? So with that being said, I agree with Dr. Karim that it boils down to the youth to exercise their right, their voice, their vote, perhaps do what Kenya did and take things, by the revolution, So because the Constitution itself, because once we speak about the Constitution, the main thing that arises is the fact that we have to protect the gains that have already been, What about what we ought to have, the meaningful redress, right? So another thing, I'm from an organization, I won't mention the organization.
Political organization. Political organization, okay. Don't say it's just an NGO, the soup kitchen. It's not a soup kitchen.
We know him. Look, the president of that organization rose through the ranks like another president who sold out, right?
Okay.
He became a president of the Youth League, and he will become a president one day.
So we see which movement you're from.
Yeah. So now we are going to a conference in December. What can you advise that so that the Constitution, when it comes in, it does not sell out as land? What restrictions we can mandate him that in that conference in December that we are putting these guidelines. If you do what Mandela did and sell out, we are going to do that. What can you advise?
All right.
Thank you very much.
Can we have your final question, if it can be a bit shorter, brief, given that you've already asked one?
No problem. I will land the plane as quickly as possible. Mine is two, right? Dr. Karomo, Dr. Masuku, and Prof. Mgomezu. The first one being that how do we, I don't know how to properly phrase this one, but in terms of framing the constitution, where do we locate it in the division that is currently happening in the socio-political structure of South Africa at the moment? So how do we expect social and economic mobility for black people in a land that is governed by a constitution that seeks to protect the interests of a minority? One. Number two, in terms of positioning the constitution in terms of maturing a society and a democracy, where do we, at what point do we say that the constitution has reached its limit? So, for example, he used Kenya, I'll use Rwanda with Paul Kagame, where we are allowing President Paul Kagame to be president for 21 years, 3 consecutive terms of 7 years, in order for the country's economy and political society to continue growing. Are we at a point where, as South Africa, should we be looking at reviewing some of those issues in order for us to continue moving forward, as opposed, as my colleague here said, that to protect the gains of democracy so far? Thank you so much.
Oh, what are we protecting, guys? What are we protecting? No, I hear you. Yeah, what are we protecting? Who would like, Dr. Masuku, can we start with you on this one?
I hear the concern and I share the same sentiment. The problem, to be honest, we are at most of the time, not at times, most of the times we are trying to be relevant with our colonial masters, including the international community. Because I'll make an example, just to suppose my point. And I was so worried, and I even challenged Professor Mgomezulu on the eve of elections that the market cannot wait anymore. The result must be released because the market is can't wait. And my question was, as a South African, as a voter, who is this market? If you remember, in my first slide, I said the richer get richer and the poor get poorer. But when you go to the root cause of that, it's because of the issues that I spoke about things that were stolen from us. As a result, it's not surprising that we've got the respected rich families in South Africa that you cannot touch. And as such, as we respect these families, being the billionaires, trillionaires, and so forth, against the majority, what implication thereof that we are putting at? Of course, you will manipulate the rand. As you know the story that went to me that the rand was manipulated, and there were no consequences of that. Hence, I spoke about that we need this clause when it comes to legal consequences in the Constitution, so as to avoid those kind of things, because we cannot be taken for a ride. Number two, the issue of locating the Constitution and economy that protect the minority is the same response that I'm giving. But let me precise now that those who are in economics or business, you know the notion has been in the market that our focus is priority. But the market has realized to say, no, let's first service our clients and then if profit becomes the bonus. When it comes to this thing of investors in South Africa, I'm saying South Africa first and the investments must come later. Because we as the citizen, we must dictate what we want. Those who have done strategic planning does not come anywhere. It must be informed by the priorities on the ground. That's the approach that I'm using. Now, coming to the question of the Section 181, money not being spent and so forth. Again, for me, it's a legal question matter and a consequence matter that she's a DG or a minister. And there are priorities in that department. Take, for instance, education. Even today. But the money is being sent back where are the legal consequences to the minister or to the DG? That's the posture that at times we need to invoke. Then the question of presidency, appointment, and so forth, I think we'll appreciate. You see, if you can go back to apartheid, I mean, I don't know how the judge was interviewed. But in this new in this new democracy, at least I can go to YouTube and listen to those interviews. And I'll make my own scores to say, but she did very well. As she became the judge, at least I know that I was covered, I listened to it. Even if I'm not happy, let's say I'm happy with the judgment, to say, wow, she did very well. But let's say I'm not happy with the judgment, but by the way, I was not even impressed by that judgment. And then the question is, how do you deal with that? We need more transparency and accountability. Let me end there.
Thank you very much, Dr. Masuku. Part of what you're talking about now is what you and Dr. Karomo spoke about earlier, is whether we're doing our work as citizens, as young people. So can I do a quick poll before Dr. Karomo speaks? How many of you would have voted for the first time in these elections? Who would have been first-time voter in these elections, these national elections? Have just turned 18, or maybe you missed it just by 1 year. Raise your hands, please. Let's see you. This would have been your first election that you would have been voting for. I didn't say. Please raise your hand. This would have been your first election, okay? How many of you actually voted in these elections, at the national and provincial elections? Of those of you who would have had this. So there are very few. So first-time voters themselves chose not to participate. That's one element of public participation that you're not engaging with. And then you're going to go blame the Constitution, which is in so how do we, I was talking to a group of activists who are in the gender space, for instance. They were saying, no, we're not going to vote in these elections. But they are the ones who are protesting every day, who are saying our rights must be afforded to, we must make sure that legislation speaks to us. But how do you cultivate a public representative that is able to listen to your ideas if you're not participating in the electoral process? So that's part of what we're not doing. And kulula, it's easy to say the Constitution is not working. Test it. The MK is testing it every day, guys. They're testing this thing called the Constitution, and we mustn't deny them that opportunity. The Constitution doesn't deny them outright that opportunity. They are testing it. And I say the MK just as one example, but we see every day NGOs who've risen to supremacy, NGOs, but they're doing what's within the law, and you can do that as well. The problem with the Constitution at the moment primarily is about the resources that we need to engage in the litigation process. It's costly. I'm a parrot, and that's not imali. So what does it mean about our voices in that space? But ultimately, if you don't exercise your power in the political participation space, you're silencing yourself in some respects. So just that poll was very important. Votani, guys. Even in the SLC elections, Sure.
I'm going to go quite quickly. These will just be some closing remarks and answers to some of these questions. I like that question about the being captured of leaders and what to include in your conference and so forth. It's a biblical reference that I've paraphrased. But it essentially says, he who cannot be trusted with little cannot be trusted with much. So even at your level of representation within the SRC, can we trust you with little at this stage? What are your moral values at this stage? If we put you in that seat tomorrow, can we say you will not feed in again to this situation that we've already been finding ourselves and align with those that are benefiting?
In other words, to feed into the feeding of yourself.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So if at this stage, already with the funds that you are given within your SRC budget, what is it that you are doing for the benefit of students? the students that have no accommodation, that have no food, what is being done from that money and not throwing Campus Life Festival? So that is an inward reflection that you can take to conference. Just as an addition there about, I like the question of does the Constitution have a ceiling? Again, when we look at the Afrocentric nature that we're saying the Constitution lacks, we must not consider South Africa as an island. A lot of these deep-rooted issues of inequality are African issues. So even when it came down to state capture, what did the AU do about that? When it came down to genocide within Africa, what has the AU done about that, including international foreign intervention within African states, which in South Africa through state capture was present? So already there's a problem with that function in that when the Constitution is clearly being ignored, even after review, what higher level can we also approach? What will it do to ensure that the Constitution is upheld? And that's the problem we also have at this stage, that the AU is a dog without teeth. It can't do anything. It itself, to an extent, is captured. Just read through the history of the foundation of the AU. So that's something that I also want us to consider as the youth, as we take up leadership, not only to occupy these spaces, but to occupy beyond those spaces so that we can change the trajectory of our continent. Because the more we are divided, the more we are conquered. And that is benefiting a much bigger elite than just what is on the surface. So thanks.
Thank you very much. Thank you to Dr. Karomo, and thank you to yourself, Dr. Masuku, for your insights tonight. I'd like to hand over now to the editor of the Herald, Rochelle de Kock, to do closing remarks. And thank you to all of you for participating so richly. We look forward to discoursing outside over some snacks. Thank you very much.
Thank you. Can everybody? Okay. Thanks, everybody. Good evening. My name is Rochelle, as introduced. I sat here completely fascinated, and I really hope that we'll have more of these discussions, Prof. Ngomezulu, just to keep talking about things that make us uncomfortable and continuing to push the status quo if we're not happy. And I think that's what we have done here this evening, and our speakers have so eloquently put into words what many of us think about and talk about in our little circles. Does the Constitution still serve its purpose, and is it still relevant today? I think those are questions that have been answered. And in fact, those are living questions, I think, that we'll continue to debate. And as our facilitator mentioned, over snacks, we can do so. What I want to perhaps just leave everybody with is the thoughts that have, echoing the thoughts that have been brought forward today is, what are you actively doing to push those changes that we are wanting to see? And the responsibility does not necessarily only lie with those who are in the political seats. The responsibility lies with each and every one of us, pushing from our little corners, wanting to make the changes that we actually would like to see. I'd like to thank Dr. Masuku. Thank you so much for your thought-provoking, leading us into the discussion that we had here this evening. Thank you for forcing us to think, some of us to think differently. I'd really like to thank also Dr. Karomo for your contribution. fascinating. Please invite me to one of your lectures. I would really like to sit in there. And of course, I'd like to also thank our program director, Mr. Mhlongo. You are welcome to come and move to Nelson Mandela Bay. You are always so willing to facilitate these events for us. So on behalf of the Herald and Nelson Mandela University's Canrad Department, Prof. Ngomezulu and your entire team, thank you so much for putting this together. And thank you for all of those who are here in attendance this evening, as well as those watching from home. Have a good evening. Thank you.
Thank you.